Captured by a tribe of Apache women, the lone rancher won their hearts. The rancher had lived alone for so long that silence felt normal to him. His small wooden house stood far from any town, surrounded by dry land, open sky, and animals that depended only on him. Every morning he woke before the sun, stepped outside and breathed in the cool desert air. He spoke more to his horses and cattle than to people. Life had taught him that solitude was safer. People brought trouble, promises that broke, and losses that never healed. He had not always been alone. Years ago he had tried life among others, but hardship, betrayal, and grief slowly pushed him away from human company. So he chose the edge of the land, a place where the earth was hard and honest. There he worked with his hands and trusted only what he could see. He knew the desert well. He understood its signs, the way the wind shifted before a storm, the way animals behaved when danger was near. Still, even with all his experience, he never believed danger would come quietly, without warning. That evening began like many others. The sun was low, painting the land in shades of orange and red. He rode out to check on his cattle near a dry riverbed, a place he had visited many times before. The ground was cracked from years without rain, and the air felt heavier than usual. His horse slowed, sensing something unfamiliar. The rancher noticed it too, but he dismissed the feeling. The desert often played tricks on the mind. He dismounted and began counting his cattle, his attention fixed on the task. That was when the silence changed. Birds that had been calling moments earlier went quiet. The wind stopped moving. A strange stillness settled around him, pressing against his chest. He turned slowly, his hand tightening around the reins. Before he could react, figures appeared from behind rocks and low hills. They moved with confidence, not haste. A group of Apache women surrounded him, their presence calm but commanding. Their eyes were sharp, observing every movement he made. He realized too late that escape was impossible. His horse stepped nervously, boxed in from all sides. Fear rushed through him, fast and cold. He had heard stories growing up, stories filled with exaggeration and misunderstanding. In that moment, every warning he had ever heard echoed in his mind. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay still. Any sudden move could make things worse. One of the women stepped forward. She did not shout or threaten him. She raised a hand, signaling him to lower his own. Her face showed no anger, only authority. Slowly, he obeyed. He released the reins and stepped away from his horse. The animal was led aside, unharmed. They spoke among themselves in a language he did not understand. Their voices were low and controlled. He was searched, not roughly but firmly. When they found no weapons that concerned them, they nodded to one another. He realized then that this was not a random act. They had chosen him. They had watched him before this moment. Without tying him or forcing him to the ground, they guided him forward. He followed because he had no other choice. As they walked, he noticed something unexpected. None of them treated him like an object or an enemy. They watched him carefully, yes, but there was no cruelty in their actions. The journey to their camp felt long, though the sun had not yet fully set. His legs ached, and his mind raced with questions he could not answer. Where were they taking him? Why had they spared him? What did they want from a man who barely had enough to survive himself? When they reached the camp, darkness had begun to fall. Fires flickered, casting warm light across faces and shelters. Children played nearby, laughing softly until they noticed him. Their curiosity replaced fear. Older women paused in their work and studied him closely. He expected shouting. He expected punishment. Instead, he was seated near a fire and given water. The simple act confused him more than violence would have. His throat was dry and he drank deeply, unsure if this kindness was temporary. Food was placed near him, not thrown, not forced, offered. He hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet nod. Hunger overcame pride. As he ate, he felt their eyes on him, measuring not his strength but his behavior. That night, he did not sleep. He sat near the fire, wrapped in a blanket they had given him, listening to the sounds of a community that functioned without him. Laughter, murmured conversations, footsteps moving with purpose. This was not chaos. This was order different from his own, but strong. Fear slowly mixed with something else, confusion, and beneath it, curiosity. He realized that he was alive not by luck but by choice. These women had power and they knew it. They had taken him without harming him. That meant something. As the fire burned lower, exhaustion finally pulled his eyes shut. Before sleep claimed him, one thought lingered in his mind. This was not the end of his life as he had feared. It was the beginning of something he could not yet understand. Morning arrived slowly in the camp. The rancher woke before the sun, the same habit he had carried for years. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the unfamiliar shapes of shelters, the distant crackle of a dying fire, and the quiet movement of people brought everything back. His heart tightened, but he stayed still. He did not want to appear afraid, yet he did not want to appear bold either. Women were already awake, moving with purpose. Some prepared food, others gathered water, and a few tended to children. No one rushed toward him. No one shouted. It was as if his presence had been accepted for the moment, though not yet understood. He noticed that every glance sent his way carried awareness, not suspicion. He waited until one of the older women approached. She placed a small bowl of food near him and gestured gently. He thanked her with a nod and ate quietly. The taste was simple but warm. He had eaten alone for so many years that sharing space with others felt strange. Still, he felt grateful. After breakfast, two women motioned for him to stand. His muscles tensed, but he obeyed. They led him a short distance away from the main camp to a shaded area. There they spoke to him using slow gestures and short words he could not understand. It became clear they were asking questions: who he was, where he lived, why he traveled alone. He answered honestly, using simple words and gestures of his own. He pointed toward the land where his ranch lay. He mimed caring for animals, working the soil, sleeping alone. They listened carefully. When he finished, they spoke among themselves for a long time. He was not returned to the fire afterward. Instead, he was guided to a small open space and shown how to help carry water. The task surprised him. He expected to be watched or restrained, but instead, he was trusted with work. He carried the heavy container slowly, making sure not to spill. When he finished, one of the women nodded in approval. As the day went on, he was given more small tasks: gathering wood, holding tools, moving supplies. Each task was a test, though no one said so aloud. He understood that every action mattered. He worked without complaint, keeping his movements calm and respectful. At times, he felt eyes on his back. He did not blame them. He was a stranger among people who had every reason to be careful. Still, the lack of harsh treatment unsettled him. He had prepared himself for suffering, not this quiet observation. When the sun reached its highest point, he was allowed to rest. Sitting beneath a tree, he watched the camp come alive with midday activity. Children laughed nearby. Elders spoke in low voices. There was a sense of belonging that stirred something painful in his chest. He had not felt part of anything like this in a long time. That afternoon, a young boy tripped and scraped his knee near where the rancher sat. Without thinking, the rancher reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean cloth he always carried. He gently pressed it to the wound. The boy stopped crying, surprised. A woman hurried over, her face tense at first, then softening when she saw what he was doing. She spoke to him, her tone questioning. He explained with gestures, pointing to the cloth and then to the wound. She nodded and helped tie it in place. That small moment changed something. The women nearby began watching him differently, not as a problem but as a person. As evening approached, the rancher felt the weight of exhaustion. Physical labor was familiar, but the emotional strain of being constantly watched drained him. Still, he did not show it. He remembered how quickly fear could be mistaken for guilt. That night he was again given food and water. He ate slowly, aware that his behavior was still being measured. Afterward, he noticed something important. No one tied him. No one guarded him closely. He could have tried to run. The thought startled him. Freedom stood just beyond the firelight, but so did uncertainty. He looked out into the dark desert. He knew that land well, but running now would mean abandoning his horse, his chance to explain himself, and whatever fragile trust had begun to form. He stayed where he was. Sleep came in short pieces. Every sound woke him. Footsteps, whispers, a child crying in the distance. Yet nothing bad happened. By morning, his body had learned the rhythm of the camp. Over the next few days, life followed a pattern. He worked. He rested. He observed. He learned. The women spoke to him more often, using simple words and gestures. He picked up meaning slowly. Water, fire, food, help. He responded in kind, pointing, showing, acting. They asked him to repair a broken shelter. He used the skills he had learned building fences and fixing barns. His hands moved with confidence. When the structure held firm, a murmur of approval passed through the group. He saw pride in their eyes, not for him, but for the work done well. Trust did not come all at once. It arrived in small pieces, a tool left within his reach, a child allowed to sit nearby, a smile that lasted a second longer than before. Still, doubt lived inside him. He wondered how long this peace would last. He wondered if there would come a day when they decided he was no longer worth the risk. At night, those thoughts kept him awake. One evening, as the sun dipped low, an older woman sat beside him by the fire. She spoke slowly, pointing to the land, then to him, then back to the camp. He understood enough to realize she was explaining why he had been taken. The land was tense. Outsiders had brought harm before. They needed to know who crossed their space. He listened carefully, nodding when he understood. When she finished, he placed his hand on his chest and then toward the ground, showing respect. She studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. That night, for the first time since his capture, he slept deeply. Fear no longer ruled his thoughts. He was still not free, but he was no longer lost. The camp had become a place of waiting, not punishment. By the end of that week, the rancher understood one clear truth. He was not being held by force. He was being held by choice, both theirs and his. And every day, with every small action, he was shaping what that choice would become. The rancher had been in the camp for several days now, and with each sunrise, he began to feel a small shift within himself. What had started as fear and confusion was slowly transforming into cautious curiosity. He realized that, although he was technically a prisoner, he was not being treated as one. The women had not tied him, had not threatened him, and had not demanded blind obedience. Instead, they allowed him to move within the camp, to work alongside them, and to observe their daily lives. And in that freedom, limited though it was, he began to feel something he had not felt in a long time: connection. Early one morning, the rancher was asked to help with the animals. A group of women were tending to goats and chickens, checking for illness or injury, and making sure the animals were fed. At first, he was unsure of what he could do. His experience had mostly been with cattle and horses, not goats or poultry. But he watched carefully, mimicking their movements, learning how to handle the animals without startling them. His hands, calloused from years of ranch work, were surprisingly adaptable. He learned quickly, and the women noticed. A nod here, a quiet smile there showed their approval. The work itself was hard, requiring bending, lifting, and patience. The rancher realized that this labor, unlike the chores he had done alone on his ranch, carried a new meaning. Every action impacted others. A goat that was fed properly meant less work later and a healthier herd. A chicken properly guided back to its pen meant warmth and safety for its chicks. Slowly, he began to understand that his presence mattered not just to himself, but to the people around him. As he worked, he listened to the women speaking softly among themselves. The sounds of their language were unfamiliar, but he began to recognize patterns, words for food, water, animals, and gestures that clarified their meaning. It was not immediate understanding, but gradual. And every small success, every moment when he could correctly interpret a word or follow a gesture, brought a quiet satisfaction. He felt useful, something he had not felt in years. One afternoon, a young girl approached him. She had a scrape on her hand, the result of playing too roughly near a fire. Without thinking, he knelt down and cleaned the wound with water he had carried, wrapping it gently with a cloth. The girl looked at him, startled, then smiled. The woman who was her guardian arrived moments later and watched as he tended to the injury. No words were spoken, but the approval was clear in the way she nodded. That moment became a turning point for the rancher. He realized that actions could speak louder than words. Care, honesty, and patience could bridge the gap between strangers. Over the next few days, the rancher was asked to perform a variety of tasks, mending fences, carrying firewood, preparing simple meals. Each task was different, but the lesson remained the same. He had to observe carefully, listen with attention, and act with thought. His mistakes were met with gentle correction rather than anger, which encouraged him to keep trying. For the first time in years, he felt the satisfaction of learning from others rather than struggling alone. Evenings in the camp were calm, almost serene. The women would gather around fires, cooking food, repairing clothing, and talking softly. The rancher would sit nearby, observing, sometimes mimicking their handiwork. Occasionally, one would gesture for him to join, handing him a simple tool or showing him how to do a stitch. He discovered that learning was not limited to survival, but could be a quiet form of connection. Each stitch he made, each meal he helped prepare, each bucket of water he carried, it all contributed to the rhythm of the camp and slowly wove him into the fabric of their lives. Despite the growing sense of inclusion, he was careful not to become too comfortable. He remembered that he was still technically their captive, even if the reality felt different. He respected boundaries and watched the reactions of those around him, learning when to speak, when to stay silent, and when to act. Over time, his awareness of their culture deepened. He began to notice how the camp was organized, the way shelters were arranged for protection from wind and sun, the careful storage of food, and the respectful distance maintained between families. Everything was purposeful, everything had meaning, and nothing was wasted. One afternoon, a sudden problem arose. A goat had wandered into thorny bushes, and the animal was stuck and frightened. The rancher acted quickly, approaching calmly and speaking softly in the only words he could manage. The women stepped back, allowing him to handle the situation. He gently freed the goat, brushing away scratches and soothing its panic. The women watched in silence, and when the goat finally ran free, one of the older women nodded approvingly. That single moment of calm, decisive action strengthened the quiet trust between him and the group. As days turned into weeks, he began to notice changes in himself. The fear that had initially dominated his thoughts was replaced by respect and admiration. He admired the women for their courage, intelligence, and resilience. They survived in a harsh environment, cared for one another, and maintained a sense of order without strict enforcement. He saw strength in their unity, in their quiet leadership, and in the way they treated him with a mixture of caution and respect. The rancher also began to share stories of his past, not with words they fully understood, but through gestures and simple drawings in the dirt. He showed them how he tended cattle, built fences, and managed the land. The women listened, sometimes imitating his movements or nodding in understanding. These exchanges, though limited, built a bridge of mutual respect. He realized that communication went beyond language. Actions, intentions, and integrity could convey meaning where words could not. Evenings became times of reflection. The rancher would sit near the fire, watching the shadows dance across the faces of those who had captured him. He realized that he was beginning to understand their ways, and more importantly, that they were beginning to understand him. He was no longer just a stranger or a prisoner. He was someone who could contribute, someone whose presence mattered. And with that realization came a strange sense of comfort, a feeling he had not known for years. One night, during a particularly quiet moment, he looked up at the stars above the desert. He remembered the solitude of his ranch, the endless miles of land where only he and his animals existed. He had thought that life without others was simpler, safer. But he now understood that safety without trust, without connection, was hollow. The camp had become a place where he could survive not just physically but emotionally. He could learn, grow, and perhaps even belong. By the end of the third week, the rancher had found a rhythm: morning work, afternoon tasks, evening reflection. He was more confident, more capable, and more integrated into the camp than ever before. Yet he remained humble, aware that acceptance had to be earned day by day. Every act of kindness, every careful movement, every honest effort contributed to the fragile trust he had begun to build. He began to notice small gestures that signaled trust from the women. A smile that lingered a moment longer, a nod of approval, a small task entrusted to him without supervision. Each moment reinforced the lesson that trust was a gift, not a right, and that it could be nurtured through patience, respect, and action. The rancher reflected often on how unusual his situation was: captured yet cared for, isolated yet gradually becoming part of a community. He understood that the women were teaching him more than survival skills. They were showing him the power of respect, observation, and quiet cooperation. Each day was a lesson in humility and strength, a balance between giving and earning trust. By the fourth week, he was no longer just a helper. He was a participant in life at the camp. He had learned to anticipate needs, to act without needing instruction, and to contribute meaningfully. The women had begun to rely on him in small ways, trusting his judgment, and even seeking his assistance in moments of difficulty. He had transformed from a captive into a member of their daily life, though the title remained unspoken and undefined. The rancher understood, however, that this was only the beginning. Trust could be fragile, and respect could be lost with a single mistake. He remained vigilant, aware that any misstep could undo weeks of careful effort. Yet he felt a quiet hope, a sense that his actions mattered, and that he was gradually becoming more than just an outsider in a world that had seemed closed to him. Each night, as he lay beneath the stars, he reflected on the day's events. He realized that he was learning not just about the women and their ways, but about himself. He had thought he knew solitude, but he had underestimated the importance of human connection, trust, and shared effort. He began to understand that survival was more than a physical act. It was emotional, social, and moral. And in that understanding, he found a sense of purpose he had long thought lost. The rancher's life had changed in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. What began as fear and captivity had grown into respect, understanding, and the first seeds of belonging. He had crossed a threshold from isolation into cautious integration, and though he knew challenges still lay ahead, he faced them with determination, patience, and a newfound appreciation for the people who had slowly, quietly, led him into their world. Weeks passed and the rancher's presence became natural. The camp had adjusted to his rhythms, just as he had adjusted to theirs. Work was shared, stories were exchanged, and trust deepened in subtle, meaningful ways. By now, he no longer saw himself as a prisoner. He was a man learning to live among others, discovering that strength could be gentle, respect could be earned, and connection could flourish even in the harshest of places. The days in the camp had settled into a rhythm, and the rancher felt a quiet sense of belonging he had never imagined possible. Each morning, he woke with purpose, aware of the tasks that needed his attention. He would fetch water, tend to the animals, and help with repairs around the camp. The women had begun to trust him with responsibilities that once would have seemed unimaginable for a captive. Though he was still an outsider by birth, his actions and his care for the community had begun to build bridges of respect and reliance. One morning, the sun rose with a pale golden light, stretching across the desert landscape. The rancher walked among the animals, checking their condition, feeding them, and ensuring they were safe. A few of the younger women observed him closely, offering guidance when needed, but allowing him space to manage on his own. His movements were careful, deliberate, showing respect not only for the animals, but also for the women who had entrusted him with them. The sense of responsibility weighed on him, yet he welcomed it. Every task completed correctly strengthened the fragile bond forming between him and the camp. Later that day, the rancher was asked to accompany a woman to the far side of the camp, where supplies and tools were kept. As they walked, she spoke in her language, and though he did not understand all the words, her tone was patient and encouraging. He watched her closely, learning from her gestures and expressions. When they reached the work area, she handed him a tool, showing him how to repair a broken fence post. His hands moved confidently, guided by years of experience on his ranch. When the repair was complete, she smiled, a small gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, he realized that respect was mutual. He had earned a part of the camp's trust, and in return, they had shown him patience and guidance. The afternoon brought a sudden challenge. A storm rolled in over the distant hills, dark clouds gathering quickly and winds picking up. The rancher noticed a child wandering near the riverbed, seemingly unaware of the approaching danger. Without hesitation, he ran to guide the child back to safety, his heart pounding as the wind howled around him. The women watched from a distance, some calling out in alarm, others moving to assist, but they allowed him the space to act. He wrapped his arms around the child, shielding her from the dust and debris as he led her back to the camp. When they arrived, a few of the women ran forward to check the child's condition, relief washing over their faces. One older woman approached him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and approval. In that single act, the rancher felt a deep shift. He was no longer just a helper, he was someone who could be counted on in moments of danger. That evening, the camp gathered around the fire. The storm had passed, leaving the desert cool and quiet. The rancher sat among the women, the children close by, listening to their stories and watching their interactions. He had learned to read their expressions and gestures, understanding more of their language each day. Though his words were limited, he communicated through action, through careful observation, and through quiet respect. The women had begun to recognize his presence not as a burden but as a support. His contribution, though small in comparison to their daily efforts, was meaningful. Over the next several days, the rancher continued to integrate further into the life of the camp. He helped prepare meals, repair shelters, and care for the young and the elderly. Each act, though simple, carried weight. He learned the value of community, the strength found in shared responsibility, and the quiet power of patience. The women began to rely on him more, not out of necessity, but out of trust. They sought his opinion on matters where his experience could help, and they allowed him to take initiative when needed. This mutual respect formed the foundation for a deeper connection that went beyond survival. One day, an older woman approached him with a serious expression. She gestured toward the youngest children, then to him, indicating that she wanted him to help teach them some basic skills. The rancher hesitated at first, unsure if he was capable or accepted enough to take on this responsibility. But when he looked into the children's eager eyes, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known. He showed them how to handle small animals gently, how to carry water without spilling, and how to assist in preparing simple meals. The children listened attentively, their curiosity and trust in him growing with each lesson. The women observed quietly, nodding in approval, acknowledging that he was earning a place in the community through his actions and guidance. Evenings became a time for reflection and shared stories. The rancher would sit near the fire, sometimes attempting to mimic the songs and tales of the women, sometimes listening silently. He learned not just practical skills, but also the values and traditions that held the camp together. Respect, courage, care for one another, these were lessons taught without words, through observation and action. He began to understand that winning their hearts was not about grand gestures or words, but about consistency, reliability, and the willingness to act with integrity. The turning point came during a particularly difficult night. A child had fallen ill unexpectedly, and panic spread quickly through the camp. The women moved swiftly, tending to the child and calling for remedies, but the situation was tense. The rancher, drawing on his years of experience managing emergencies on his ranch, acted calmly. He helped prepare a warm compress, guided the women in ways to comfort the child, and remained alert throughout the night. His calm presence reassured the women, who gradually allowed him to take the lead in small but crucial actions. When morning came, the child was safe, and the women's expressions of gratitude were profound. In that night, the rancher's place in their hearts was solidified. He was not just tolerated, he was valued. From that night onward, the dynamics of the camp subtly shifted. The rancher was included in decisions, invited to assist in planning daily tasks, and encouraged to share his knowledge when appropriate. The women began to see him as more than a man who had been captured. He had become a trusted member of their community. The trust and respect were mutual. He had earned their hearts not through words or persuasion, but through actions, courage, and steadfast care. The rancher also noticed changes within himself. The isolation he had once cherished now felt empty, a stark contrast to the quiet satisfaction he found in contributing to the camp. He realized that strength was not just surviving alone, but supporting others, being reliable, and demonstrating care without expectation. He had learned humility, patience, and the quiet power of consistent kindness. The women had not only accepted him, they had taught him what it meant to belong, to be part of something greater than oneself. As days turned into weeks, the rancher's relationship with the camp deepened. The women trusted him with the most important aspects of daily life. Children ran to him for guidance. The elderly sought his help when lifting or moving supplies, and even those who had been wary at first now approached him with ease. The camp had transformed from a place of fear and uncertainty into a community where he was respected, relied upon, and valued. He had truly become one of them, not by force, but through trust, care, and consistent action. By the end of his first month fully integrated, the rancher understood something profound. He had arrived at the camp as a captive, unsure of his fate and fearful of harm. Yet through patience, respect, and service, he had gained not only survival but acceptance and love. The hearts of the women, once guarded and cautious, were now open to him. He had earned a place not by domination or power, but by humility, courage, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. In the quiet moments, sitting near the fire and watching the stars over the desert, the rancher reflected on how much he had grown. He had been captured by circumstance, yet through character and action, he had captured something far greater: trust, respect, and a sense of belonging that had once seemed impossible. The camp, once a place of fear, had become a home, not in walls or land, but in hearts and shared lives. And for the first time in many years, the rancher felt truly at peace, understanding that the greatest victories often come not through force, but through patience, courage, and quiet care. The weeks turned into months, and the rancher had fully settled into the rhythm of life in the camp. He no longer felt like a visitor or an outsider. He had become a part of the community through trust, care, and consistent effort. Each day began with purpose, from helping with the animals to assisting in preparing food and mending shelters. Every task was an opportunity to show respect and to contribute, and each successful action strengthened the bond he shared with the women and children of the camp. One morning, as the sun rose over the desert hills, the rancher walked to the riverbed to fetch water. The air was cool and still, carrying the soft sounds of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As he worked, he noticed the women watching him with calm interest, no longer with suspicion or caution. Their glances carried acknowledgement and appreciation. He realized that over time, his presence had become natural, valued, and even expected. He had gone from a stranger to someone who could be relied upon, not because he demanded it, but because his actions had earned it. Later that day, an unexpected challenge arose. One of the younger children became suddenly ill, and panic spread quickly through the camp. The women moved with swift precision, but the tension was visible in their gestures and the urgency of their voices. The rancher stepped forward instinctively. Drawing on the experience he had gained on his own ranch, and through observing the women, he began to assist with calming the child, preparing a warm compress, and suggesting practical ways to comfort and care for the child. His calm demeanor had a ripple effect. The women began to relax slightly, trusting him to act alongside them. For hours, he remained attentive, supporting and guiding until the child's condition improved. That night, the gratitude of the women was evident. They did not just thank him with words. They showed their appreciation through gestures, smiles, and quiet nods of respect. The rancher felt a profound sense of belonging. He had been captured by them months earlier, unsure of his fate, but now he realized that through his courage, patience, and willingness to help, he had captured their hearts. He understood that true trust and respect are earned not through fear or force, but through action, integrity, and care. In the days that followed, the women began to include him more in the life of the camp. They sought his opinion on decisions, invited him to help plan daily work, and shared stories and experiences with him. The rancher learned more about their lives, their struggles, joys, and the traditions that guided their community. He listened with attention, asking questions through gestures and simple words, always showing respect and interest. In return, the women shared their knowledge, teaching him lessons that went beyond survival, the importance of unity, empathy, and understanding. One afternoon, the leader of the group, an older woman who had observed him closely from the beginning, approached him. She spoke in slow, deliberate words, pointing to the desert beyond the camp and then to him. Although he did not understand every word, he sensed the meaning. She was giving him a choice. He could leave the camp and return to the life he had known before, or he could stay. The offer was made without force or pressure, a true test of what he had become. The rancher walked to the edge of the camp, looking out at the vast desert that had once been his entire world. The land stretched endlessly, familiar yet empty. He remembered the solitude of his ranch, the quiet days and nights spent alone with his thoughts. For a moment he felt the pull of that life, the comfort of knowing that he was responsible only for himself. But then he looked back at the camp, the women, the children, the life he had helped nurture. He saw faces filled with trust and care, gestures that spoke of acceptance and respect. His heart swelled with a feeling he had not known in years, belonging. He realized that leaving would mean abandoning the connections he had worked so hard to build. It would mean turning his back on the trust he had earned and the lives he had touched. Staying, on the other hand, would allow him to continue contributing, to continue learning, and to continue being part of something greater than himself. The choice was clear. With a deep breath, he stepped back into the camp, his decision made not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine care and commitment. The women welcomed his return with quiet approval, gestures of respect and warmth that spoke more than words ever could. Children ran to him, seeking guidance and comfort, while the adults acknowledged his presence with nods and smiles. He had chosen to stay, and in doing so, he had cemented his place in the hearts of the people who had once captured him. The transformation was complete. He was no longer a captive, nor merely a helper. He was a member of their community, respected and valued. Over the following months, the rancher continued to grow in his role within the camp. He shared his skills and knowledge freely, assisting with repairs, guiding younger members in practical tasks, and helping manage the animals. He also learned from the women, adopting their methods and understanding their ways. Together, they built a stronger, more resilient community, each person contributing according to their abilities. The camp thrived, and the rancher found fulfillment not in solitude, but in connection, cooperation, and mutual respect. He also discovered a new understanding of himself. The isolation he had once prized now seemed empty compared to the richness of shared life. Strength was no longer measured by how well he could survive alone, but by how he could support, protect, and care for others. Courage was not only physical but moral. The ability to act responsibly, to gain trust, and to uphold integrity even in uncertainty. Through this journey, he had learned that freedom was more than movement across land. It was the freedom to belong, to be trusted, and to contribute meaningfully. As the seasons changed, the bond between the rancher and the camp grew stronger. He had arrived as a stranger, captured and uncertain, but he had remained through his actions, patience, and care. The women had opened their hearts to him, and he had reciprocated with loyalty and dedication. Together, they had created a community built on respect, trust, and shared responsibility. The rancher had found a home, not in buildings or land, but in people and relationships. One evening, as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the rancher sat near the fire, surrounded by the women and children of the camp. He watched the glow of their faces, the calm and quiet strength in their movements, and the simple joy in their interactions. For the first time in years, he felt a deep and enduring peace. He had been captured by circumstance, but through character, courage, and care, he had captured something far more valuable, the hearts of a community and a place where he truly belonged. In that quiet moment, the rancher reflected on his journey. He remembered the fear that had gripped him on that first day, the uncertainty and anxiety that had filled his nights, and the gradual steps he had taken to earn trust and respect. He understood now that life's greatest transformations often come from unexpected places, and that the bonds we create with others can be stronger and more lasting than any solitude or independence we might cherish. He had been given a choice, and he had chosen connection over isolation, courage over fear, and community over loneliness. The camp had become more than a place to survive. It was a place to live fully, with purpose, care, and belonging. The rancher had learned that true freedom was not simply being able to leave, but being able to stay, to contribute, and to be part of something larger than oneself. He had found trust, friendship, respect, and acceptance, and in return he had given loyalty, service, and care. The hearts he had won were not won through force or persuasion, but through quiet courage, consistent action, and genuine regard for others. By the end of his journey, the rancher had transformed completely. He was no longer the solitary man who had roamed the desert alone. He was a trusted member of the camp, a figure of reliability, care, and respect. He had found a home not in land or walls, but in the hearts of those who had once captured him, and in doing so, he had discovered the true meaning of belonging, community, and life itself. And as he watched the night sky over the desert, the firelight reflecting in the faces around him, the rancher understood a simple truth. Life's greatest gifts often come from the moments we least expect, and the bonds we build with others can transform even the loneliest heart into one full of connection, trust, and love. The camp, once a place of fear, had become a home, and he had become a part of it in the most meaningful way possible.